Hi there, welcome back to the English Talk community. I'm Julia, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Let me start by asking you something simple, but important. Have you ever stopped yourself from speaking English because you were afraid you might sound not smart enough? Maybe you hesitated before joining a conversation. Maybe you had something valuable to say, but you didn't say it because you were too focused on your grammar, your accent, or how your words might come out. If that sounds familiar, you're definitely not alone. I want you to take a deep breath right now, because this episode is for you. Today, we're going to talk about something that might completely change how you think about English conversations. The title of this episode is How to Sound Smart in English Conversations. But here's the secret. Sounding smart has very little to do with using long or complicated words. It's not about perfect grammar, and it's definitely not about impressing people with fancy vocabulary. In fact, did you know that the smartest English speakers often don't try to sound smart at all? They focus on being clear, on being connected, on being real. And that's what we're going to explore together. But before we go further, let me ask one more thing. If you're someone who wants to speak English with more confidence, if you're tired of second-guessing your words and you want to be part of conversations without fear or self-doubt, then go ahead and like this episode and subscribe to the English Talk community. It lets me know this topic really matters to you. And more importantly, it helps us reach more people around the world who are on this same journey. People just like you. Now let's take this step together, one conversation at a time. I want you to remember something. English fluency is a journey, not a test. And you're already doing more than enough by showing up, listening, and practicing. Let's let go of that pressure to be perfect and start focusing on being present. Let me tell you a story. A few months ago, I met Elias, a university student from Oslo. He had just moved to Vancouver to study business. Elias told me that during his first few weeks, he stayed mostly quiet in group discussions, not because he didn't know the answers, but because he didn't want to sound less intelligent in English. He was always trying to translate complex ideas from Norwegian into English, and by the time he had something prepared, the conversation had already moved on. He felt frustrated and invisible. But something changed for him when he stopped trying to translate perfectly and started using the simplest version of what he wanted to say. Instead of strategic financial reallocation, he just said, moving the money to better places. Instead of, this contradicts our previous projections, he said, this is not what we expected. Suddenly, people were listening to him. They understood him. And more importantly, they saw him. That's when Elias realized he didn't need to impress anyone with big words. He just needed to make his ideas clear. Let me tell you, this happens all the time. People all over the world are holding themselves back because they think sounding smart means sounding complicated. But in real conversations, simplicity is power. Think about it. When someone says, I don't agree with that, and here's why, that sounds confident, right? It's simple, clear, direct. And that's exactly what smart communication is. Now I want to talk about mindset, because how we think affects how we speak. When you believe that your ideas matter, you naturally start speaking with more clarity. It's not about using perfect English. It's about trusting that your thoughts are worth sharing, even if they come out in simple words. I once spoke to May, a nurse from Taipei who was living in Manchester. She was fluent in English but always hesitated during meetings. She told me, I feel like everyone else sounds more professional than me. But when I asked her what she usually said in meetings, her responses were focused, logical, and calm. She just didn't recognize her own clarity as intelligence. After a while, she stopped comparing herself and started speaking more. And guess what happened? Her team started asking for her input more often. She didn't change her English, she changed her mindset. And that's the shift I want for you too. You are already smarter than you think. You've already done the hard part. You're learning, practicing, and showing up. Now it's time to let go of the fear that's been holding you back and allow yourself to speak up, even if your sentence isn't perfect. Let's stop asking, how can I sound smarter? And start asking, how can I make my ideas clearer? That shift alone will take you so far. Every time you speak, you're building trust, with yourself and with others. You're practicing clarity, and you're growing. You don't need to memorize advanced vocabulary or imitate someone else's style. You just need to express yourself clearly and honestly. So as we continue this episode, I invite you to relax, to listen, and to let go of that pressure to perform. You don't have to sound like a native speaker. You just have to sound like you, the version of you that communicates with clarity, curiosity, and confidence. Remember, you don't need to earn the right to speak. You already have that right. And you don't need to sound impressive. You just need to be present, focused, and real. That's how smart speakers sound in every language. Let's go on this journey together. Let me tell you something I've learned after years of working with English learners from all over the world. The smartest speakers are not the ones who use the longest words. They are the ones who speak simply, clearly, and confidently. And today, I want to talk about the power of simplicity, how using fewer words can actually say more. I want to introduce you to Sophie. She's a graphic designer from Paris who moved to Toronto a year ago. When she arrived, she already had a solid level of English. She had studied for years, passed exams, and even took advanced business English courses. She was proud of her vocabulary list, full of words like comprehensive, articulate, collaborative synergy, and optimize. These were the words she thought she needed to use to fit in and sound intelligent at work. So when she started her job at a design agency in downtown Toronto, she tried hard to use the vocabulary she had learned. Every time she spoke during team meetings or presentations, she'd carefully prepare her sentences in advance, choosing what she believed were smart expressions. But something unexpected happened. People would sometimes look confused. Her sentences were long, full of complex structures, and she often paused, trying to remember the exact word she had memorized. The result? She sounded less confident than she actually was. Her coworkers were polite, but she could tell her message wasn't landing the way she wanted. One day, after a meeting, her colleague Ben, who grew up in Toronto, pulled her aside and said something simple but powerful. He told her, "You don't need to try so hard. Just say it the way you think it. No one here speaks like a textbook." That moment changed everything for Sophie. She started paying more attention to how native speakers communicated. She noticed that they often used simple, direct phrases like, "Let's fix that. That's not working." Or, "I like this version better." They weren't using big, impressive words. They were being clear. And that clarity made them sound confident and in control. Sophie realized that her goal shouldn't be to sound sophisticated. Her goal should be to make sure her message was heard and understood. So she started simplifying. Instead of saying, "I believe we should reconsider our current visual direction," she just said, "Let's try a different look." Instead of, "I am inclined to support your suggestion," she said, "That sounds good to me." And suddenly her coworkers started listening more closely. Her voice became a natural part of the team conversation. There's something really powerful about short, clear sentences. They don't just help others understand you, they also help you feel more relaxed when you speak. When you're not trying to build long, perfect sentences in your mind, you free yourself from overthinking. You stop translating in your head. You start talking. I want you to think about a conversation you had recently in English. Did you ever find yourself stuck, searching for a better word? Did you stay quiet because you didn't know how to say something in a smart way? I get it. That pressure to impress can feel heavy. But here's the truth. Sounding smart is not about using difficult words. It's about choosing words that work. When you speak simply, you make it easier for others to follow your ideas. And when people understand you easily, they see you as confident, even if your grammar isn't perfect. That's what fluency is. Not perfection, just flow, connection, presence. Let me give you another example. Imagine you're in a meeting and you want to share your opinion. You could say, "From my perspective, it would be beneficial to consider an alternative strategy moving forward." Or you could say, "I think we should try something else." Which one feels more natural to you? Which one would you actually say in the moment? Most fluent speakers choose the second one because it's faster, clearer, and easier to say under pressure. Now, I'm not saying that you should never use more advanced vocabulary. Of course, there are moments when it fits. But if using a certain word or phrase is slowing you down, making you nervous, or confusing the person you're speaking to, it's not helping you sound smart. It's doing the opposite. Think of your English as a tool. The best tools are the ones you can use easily. If a sentence is too complex to say comfortably, simplify it. If you're not sure how to express something perfectly, say it the way you'd explain it to a friend. Start from what you know. Start from what you can say right now. When I coach students on improving their spoken English, one of the first exercises we do is rewriting long sentences into short ones. We practice saying the same idea in 5 words instead of 15. At first, it feels strange, but then it becomes freeing, because suddenly they realize they don't need to impress anyone. They just need to connect. So much of English fluency is about confidence. And confidence comes when you stop trying to sound like someone else and start sounding like yourself in English. That version of you doesn't need big words. That version of you just needs a clear voice, a calm presence, and the courage to speak. So the next time you're about to speak English, whether it's in a meeting, a classroom, a coffee shop, or even just talking to yourself, remember this: short is smart, simple is smart, clarity is power. One of the biggest misconceptions people have when they try to sound smart in English is thinking they need to use complicated vocabulary. I hear this all the time. Students tell me they're memorizing lists of advanced words or trying to sound more academic, thinking that's what makes them appear intelligent. But in real-life conversations, at work, with friends, in meetings, or even in interviews, what really makes someone sound smart is not the size of their vocabulary. It's how they structure their ideas. Structure gives your words power. When your thoughts are organized, people listen. And one of the easiest ways to create structure in spoken English is by using smart connectors. These are simple, everyday phrases that native speakers use constantly. They're not fancy, and that's exactly why they work. They make your speech feel natural, smooth, and thoughtful. And the best part is, anyone can learn to use them. Let me show you how powerful this can be. Imagine someone says something in a conversation that you disagree with. You could stay quiet, or you could respond with something direct and clear. Instead of just saying no, you can say, "I see what you mean, but I think there's another way to look at it." That one sentence, simple, polite, structured, immediately shows confidence, respect, and logical thinking. You've just used a smart connector. One of my favorite connectors is actually. It's a short word, but it can do so much. You can use it to correct someone gently. Actually, I think the meeting is at 2, not 3. Or to introduce a different opinion. Actually, I had a different idea in mind. It softens what you're saying while still allowing you to speak up. It gives you time to think, and it creates a smooth transition from one thought to another. Another great one is, "That's a good point." When you say this, you're acknowledging the other person's idea before adding your own. It builds connection and makes your response feel more collaborative. You could say, "That's a good point, and maybe we can also try this approach." It's such a small phrase, but it makes a big difference in how you're perceived. You're no longer just reacting. You're participating thoughtfully. These connectors are like bridges. They link one idea to the next and help your listener follow your thinking. Without them, your speech can feel a little jumpy or confusing. With them, even simple ideas sound more organized. I once worked with a student named Amir from Istanbul, who was working in customer service in Dubai. He told me he often froze when talking to English-speaking clients, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he didn't know how to say it in a way that sounded professional. We focused on connectors. He started practicing responses like, "I understand your concern. Let me explain what we can do." Or, "Thanks for your feedback. Here's how I'd suggest moving forward." These small changes helped him sound confident and calm, even when dealing with difficult situations. It wasn't about changing his vocabulary. It was about giving his ideas shape. And once he started using these connectors, his calls went more smoothly, and he felt more in control of the conversation. There are so many of these phrases you can start using right away. For example, "First of all, the thing is, from my experience, that makes sense," or even, "Let me think for a second." These aren't academic. They're real, and they're used all the time in daily English to guide conversations, show that you're listening, or smoothly introduce your opinion. And here's something interesting. When you use connectors well, people often assume your English is more advanced than it actually is. Not because your vocabulary is difficult, but because your thoughts are clear. You sound prepared, even when you're speaking spontaneously. That's the kind of smart we want. Another student I worked with, Elena, was from Warsaw and working as a project coordinator in Berlin. Her English was strong, but she told me she often felt ignored during meetings. She'd share her opinion, but the room would move on quickly. We looked at her speaking style and realized she wasn't giving people enough signals that she was presenting a new idea. She was just saying what she thought without framing it. So we practiced adding connectors like what I'm thinking is, or one possible solution might be, or even just pausing and saying, let me add something here. Suddenly, people started reacting differently. She wasn't saying anything new, but she was saying it in a way that people could follow and respond to. It's not magic. It's just structure. And the best part is, once you become aware of these phrases, you start hearing them everywhere. In movies, in podcasts, in real conversations. You'll notice how often fluent speakers use them, not to sound smarter, but to sound clearer. There's something deeply reassuring about knowing you don't have to invent long, complex sentences to express yourself well. You just need a few tools to guide your thoughts. That's all connectors are. Tools. Simple, powerful tools that help you take control of how you speak and how people hear you. And if you're someone who gets nervous during group conversations, these phrases can be especially helpful. They give you a way to enter the conversation without interrupting or sounding unsure. Phrases like, can I just add something? Or, that reminds me of. Or even, just to build on what you said, allow you to participate naturally. You don't have to wait for the perfect moment or perfect sentence. You just have to connect your idea to what's already happening. The more you practice this, the more fluent you'll feel. Because fluency isn't just about speed or vocabulary, it's about flow. And smart connectors help you create that flow, one sentence at a time. Let me tell you about someone who completely changed the way he communicated in English, just by learning to use connectors naturally. His name is Luca. He's originally from Milan, Italy, and he moved to Berlin a little over a year ago to work for a tech startup. Luca had studied English for most of his life. He had done well in school, passed multiple exams, and could hold a conversation without much trouble. But when it came to speaking in meetings or sharing ideas during group discussions, he often felt invisible. It wasn't that Luca didn't have anything to say. In fact, he had a lot of great insights. His background in product design gave him a unique perspective, and he had a strong creative instinct. But every time he spoke, he felt like his words landed flat. People would nod politely, then move on. He wasn't sure why. His English was accurate. His ideas were relevant. But something was missing. At first, Luca assumed the problem was vocabulary. Maybe his words weren't smart enough. So he started trying to memorize more complex terms, words like implement, innovative, synergy, and efficiency. He used them whenever he could, but the results didn't change. The room still went quiet after he spoke, and he didn't feel heard. We started working together during this period. One of the first things I asked him was how he prepared to speak in meetings. He said he wrote his points down word for word and practiced them in his head. I asked him if he ever used connectors, phrases like, from my perspective, what I've noticed is, or that reminds me of something. He paused, then admitted he avoided those phrases because he thought they sounded too casual. He wanted to sound professional. This is such a common misunderstanding. We often think that sounding professional means using formal language, but what really creates professionalism is clarity, structure, and connection. And those things are exactly what connectors help you achieve. So we started working on those small, natural phrases. Not the kind that belong in textbooks, but the kind that native speakers use every day to sound thoughtful and organized. I gave Luca a list of common connectors and asked him to practice using just one or two in each meeting. At first, he chose, from my perspective, and that reminds me of, because they felt easy to remember. The next week, he came back with a big smile on his face. He said something strange had happened. During a team brainstorm, someone brought up a challenge with user feedback. Luca raised his hand and said, from my perspective, the issue is not the feedback itself, but how we collect it. He told me that as soon as he said it, people stopped and actually looked at him. Then a colleague said, that's a really good point. And the team started building on his idea. For the first time, Luca felt like his voice mattered. He didn't change his vocabulary. He didn't say anything more advanced. He simply added a connector, a phrase that helped guide his listener through his thought. That one phrase made it clear that what he was about to say was his opinion, and that gave his words more weight. The following week, he tried using, that reminds me of, when responding to a teammate's comment. The discussion was about improving the onboarding experience for new users. Someone mentioned how complicated the sign-up process was, and Luca jumped in with, that reminds me of something I saw in another app. They use a simple progress bar to show how far along you are. Again, people responded immediately. His comment didn't just sit in the air, it moved the conversation forward. And that's the beauty of using connectors. They don't just make you sound more natural. They make your ideas easier to follow. They show that you're not just speaking to speak, but that you're building on something, responding with intention, and contributing to the conversation in a real way. Luca started to feel more relaxed during meetings. He wasn't rehearsing every sentence. He was engaging. He was listening actively and responding in real time. And with just a few connectors, he had found his voice in English. One of the things I noticed as we kept working together was that Luca began to experiment with other phrases too. He started saying things like, "Here's how I see it. Let me explain my thinking, and I'm not sure, but maybe we could try." These small openings gave him space to think while he spoke. They also gave his teammates a clear signal that he had something to add. He told me that before using these phrases, he always felt pressure to be quick and perfect. He thought he had to speak fast, without hesitation, to be taken seriously. But with connectors, he realized he could slow down. He could guide people through his thought process step by step. That was a turning point. His manager even commented on it during a performance review. She said, "Luca, I've noticed you've been more vocal in meetings lately. You've really stepped up in how you share ideas." That feedback meant a lot to him. It wasn't about sounding like a native speaker. It was about being part of the conversation. What I love about Luca's story is that it shows how small changes can create big results. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to transform his English overnight. He just needed the right tools. And connectors, those simple, practical phrases, were exactly what helped him get there. So if you ever feel like people aren't really listening when you speak in English, try what Luca did. Add a phrase at the beginning. Give your listener a little map of where you're going. You'll be surprised how much more confident and organized you sound, without changing who you are or what you want to say. One of the most powerful changes you can make to sound more confident in English is something that doesn't require more vocabulary or better grammar. It's about what you don't say. I'm talking about filler words, those little sounds and expressions we often use to fill silence when we're thinking. Words like, like, you know, so, and I mean. They slip into our speech when we feel nervous, uncertain, or rushed. And the more we use them, the less confident we sound, even if we know exactly what we want to say. Now, don't get me wrong. Native speakers use filler words too. We all do. They're part of natural conversation. But the difference is in how often and how intentionally they appear. When every sentence is full of or like, the message becomes harder to follow. It starts to feel messy or unprepared. And in professional or formal situations, that can make people doubt your confidence, even if you know what you're talking about. I want to tell you about a student I worked with named Aiko. She's from Osaka and now works in a design agency in London. Aiko is incredibly talented and creative, and her written English is very strong. But during presentations, she felt anxious, and that anxiety showed up in her voice, mainly through filler words. She'd start with, today I want to, talk about this new concept. And even though her content was excellent, people focused more on how she was speaking than what she was saying. She came to me frustrated, asking how she could stop saying like so much. We didn't begin with grammar exercises or pronunciation drills. Instead, we started with silence. I told her that silence is not something to fear in a conversation. In fact, it's a sign of control. When you pause instead of filling the space with a sound, you're sending a message. I am thinking. I am choosing my words. I am in control. This is something confident speakers do all the time. They don't rush. They don't feel the need to fill every second with sound. They pause. And that pause gives their words more weight. I had Aiko practice with short sentences. I asked her to speak slowly, deliberately, and when she needed time to think, to stop talking. Just stop. Let the silence be there. At first, she told me it felt uncomfortable, like she was doing something wrong. But after a few sessions, something changed. She started to enjoy that pause. It gave her time to breathe, and more importantly, it gave her power. In her next team meeting, she gave a presentation where she deliberately paused instead of using filler words. She started with, "Today, I want to introduce a new design concept." Then she stopped. She looked at her team, and then continued, This idea came from feedback we received last month. No filler, no rushing, just calm, clear speech. Her manager told her afterward, "You sounded much more confident today. Great job." That small shift made a big impact. One technique I like to teach is what I call owning the pause. Instead of seeing silence as something to avoid, learn to use it as a tool. When someone asks you a question and you need a second to think, try this. Pause, take a breath, and then say your answer. Even 2 seconds of silence can make you sound more thoughtful. Another tip is to record yourself. This is something I do with many of my students. Record a short explanation or introduction, just 1 or 2 minutes long. Then play it back and count the filler words. You'll probably be surprised at how often they appear. The good news is, once you become aware of them, you can begin to change the habit. Replacing filler words with nothing, just a pause, is ideal. But sometimes it helps to have a few simple phrases you can use instead. For example, instead of saying, you can say, "Let me think about that." Instead of like, you can say, "For example." Instead of, try, "What I mean is." These aren't fancy words. They're clear, intentional phrases that help you stay on track. One of the reasons we rely on filler words is that we feel pressure to speak fast. We think that fluency means speed, but smart speakers aren't the fastest. They're the most thoughtful. They choose their words carefully. They speak with intention, and they don't rush to fill every moment. Let's talk about another student I met, Carlos, an engineer from Madrid working in Amsterdam. He told me that in team meetings, he always felt like he had to keep up with the native speakers. They spoke so quickly, and he didn't want to fall behind. So he pushed himself to speak faster and faster, but the faster he spoke, the more uhs and likes came out. And people started interrupting him, finishing his sentences. He felt invisible. I told Carlos to slow down, just a little. Not too much, just enough to give his thoughts room to breathe. We practiced simple, slow answers to common work questions. "Yes, I can take care of that. Let me look into it and get back to you." I think we should consider another option. Short, clear, and calm. Without filler. The next time he had a project meeting, he followed this advice. He slowed down. He paused when needed. And at the end, his manager said, "Thanks, Carlos. That was clear." Clear, not fast, not perfect. Clear. And that's what matters. Confidence in English is not about speaking like a machine. It's about control. When you stop using filler words, people notice. They hear your message more clearly. They trust your words more easily. And most importantly, you start trusting yourself more. This is something anyone can learn. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner or advanced. Start by becoming aware of your filler words. Notice them. Listen to yourself. Practice pausing. Use silence as your tool. You don't need to fill the space. You are enough. Your voice is enough. Let me introduce you to Hannah, a quiet but determined woman from Seoul. Hannah had always been the kind of person who worked hard behind the scenes. She wasn't loud or outspoken, but when she did speak, it was always thoughtful. In Korean, she was known for being precise and composed. But when it came to speaking English, especially in front of others, something changed. Hannah moved to Sydney to take part in a 6-month leadership course organized by her company. It was a big step. She had worked in South Korea for almost a decade and was now preparing to lead international teams. Her English was good, technically. She could understand meetings, write reports, and communicate basic ideas. But whenever she had to speak in front of others, especially native speakers, she felt overwhelmed. She believed silence was dangerous. Every time she paused, even for a second, she thought she was failing, that someone would interrupt, that they'd assume she didn't know what she was doing. So, like many learners, Hannah rushed through her sentences. She would speak quickly, trying to say everything before anyone could jump in, but the faster she spoke, the more unsure she sounded. Her sentences would trail off. She'd repeat herself, and often people would look confused. I met Hannah during the 2nd month of her course. She had been asked to present a case study in front of a small group. She came to me the day before, visibly nervous. She said, "I speak too fast. I forget what I want to say. I don't want them to think I'm nervous, but I always sound like I am." So I asked her to read her script out loud. She spoke without stopping, hardly taking a breath. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I gently asked, "What's your main message here?" She took a deep breath and said, that we need to listen to our customers more carefully before launching a new product. I said, "Great. Now say just that one sentence, but this time, slowly, and pause after." She looked at me a little confused, but she tried. "We need to listen to our customers more carefully before launching a new product." Then she paused. And that pause changed everything. I told her, "Did you feel that?" She nodded slowly. "That felt different," she said. And I explained that when we pause, even for a few seconds, we give our words a place to land. We give our listeners time to think. And we give ourselves space to breathe. From that point on, we practiced using silence with intention. We worked on small parts of her presentation, one section at a time. I showed her how to add natural pauses, not just at the end of sentences, but between ideas. We also practiced eye contact, so that the pause didn't feel empty. She didn't need to say more to sound smarter. She just needed to say it clearly and let it sit. The next day, Hannah stood in front of her group. She looked calm. She started with, "Today, I want to talk about something simple, but often ignored." She paused. The room was quiet. Everyone looked at her. Then she continued, "Listening to our customers before we launch anything new." Another pause. I was in the back of the room, watching. You could feel the shift. The audience leaned in. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to impress. She was in control. After her presentation, several people came up to her. One said, "You sounded very clear. I liked how calm you were." Another said, "You made me think. That was powerful." For Hannah, this was a turning point. Not just because people noticed, but because she felt something shift inside herself. She realized that silence wasn't a weakness. It was a skill, a tool. When she used it well, it didn't create discomfort. It created presence, confidence. And more than that, it gave her power in a room full of voices. Hannah told me later that growing up, she had always felt pressure to be fast in English. Teachers praised quick responses. Test formats rewarded speed. And in many cultures, including hers, silence in conversation was seen as hesitation or lack of knowledge. But in Sydney, during her leadership course, she saw something different. The leaders she admired the most weren't the fastest speakers. They were the calmest, the clearest, and they all used silence in a very intentional way. She started paying attention during meetings. She noticed how native English speakers often paused before answering a difficult question, sometimes even 3 or 4 seconds. They weren't afraid of that gap. It gave them time to choose their words carefully. It showed they were thinking, and people respected that. This changed Hannah's mindset completely. She stopped trying to sound fluent. She focused instead on sounding clear. Her goal became connection, not perfection. She wasn't trying to fill space with words anymore. She was trying to create meaning. And to do that, she learned to trust silence. She started applying this new approach in team discussions. Instead of jumping in quickly, she'd wait for the right moment. And when she did speak, she'd say one clear point, then pause. Her colleagues noticed. They started asking for her opinion more often. She was no longer the quiet observer. She had become a quiet leader. I remember asking her one day, "What changed the most for you?" And she said something I'll never forget. She said, "I used to be afraid that people would think I didn't know what to say. Now I know that silence is part of what I want to say." That's something I wish every English learner could understand. You don't need to fill every second with words. You don't need to speak quickly to be respected. In fact, when you pause, when you allow a moment of silence, you show strength. You show that you're comfortable with your thoughts, that you don't need to prove anything, that you own the space you're in. Hannah's journey is one of my favorite stories to share because it shows that fluency is not just about words, it's about presence. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. One of the most underrated skills in any conversation is listening. Not just hearing the words, but really listening. Active listening is one of the clearest signs of intelligence, and it's especially powerful in English conversations. So many English learners focus on what they're going to say, how to say it right, how to respond quickly, and they forget that sometimes saying less is what makes you sound smarter. When you truly listen, you create space for connection. You make the other person feel heard, and you show them that their words matter. And in return, people begin to see you as someone thoughtful, someone who thinks before speaking, someone who understands more than they say. Let me walk you through what active listening looks like in practice, especially for English learners. First, it's about attention. You're not thinking about your response while the other person is talking. You're focusing on their message. That alone sets you apart. But there's more to it. You can show that you're listening in small, powerful ways, like repeating, rephrasing, or summarizing what the speaker just said. These are simple moves, but they instantly elevate the quality of your interaction. Imagine someone says, "I've been having trouble getting my team to meet deadlines lately." You could respond with something like, "So you're saying it's been hard to manage their time?" That's repeating and rephrasing. Or you could say, "It sounds like the delays are really frustrating you." That's summarizing and showing empathy. These short responses show you're not just waiting to talk, you're paying attention. I worked with a student named Don from Rotterdam who was working for an international logistics company in Singapore. He often felt pressure during meetings because his colleagues were native English speakers from Australia, the UK, and the US. Don's English was already advanced, but he didn't feel confident contributing during group discussions. He didn't want to say something wrong or be misunderstood, so he stayed quiet most of the time. When we started working together, I asked him if he ever responded to comments by reflecting or summarizing what someone else had said. He looked puzzled and said, "Is that allowed? I thought I should only speak if I have a new idea." That's a common belief, but it's not true. I told him, one of the smartest things you can do in a conversation is to repeat part of what someone else said and build on it. That shows respect, understanding, and confidence, even if you don't add a brand new point. So we practiced. We worked on small, natural responses like, "I agree with what you said about timelines," or "That reminds me of what Jane mentioned earlier." These were short, simple phrases, but they gave Don a new way to participate. He tried it in his next meeting. When someone finished a presentation, he said, "I liked your point about reducing warehouse costs. I think that could really work in our team too." He told me that for the first time, his manager smiled and said, "Thanks, Don, that's a great point." He hadn't shared a long, complex idea. He had simply reflected something useful, and that made him part of the conversation. This kind of listening shows you're engaged. It shows that you process what's being said. And when you do speak, your words have more impact because they're rooted in what the other person just shared. It's not just about your English, it's about how you make the other person feel. Another example comes from Amina, a software developer from Cairo who moved to Dublin. She joined a team full of strong personalities and fast talkers. At first, she felt overwhelmed. It was hard to jump into the conversation, and when she did, she often got interrupted. So instead of trying to be louder, she became more intentional. She started listening for key points and then speaking up only when she could reflect or support what had been said. One day during a brainstorming session, a colleague mentioned a client request. Amina waited until they finished and said, "Just to go back to what Mark said earlier, I think that feature could solve their issue." That one sentence caught everyone's attention. Suddenly, people realized she was paying attention. Her words carried weight, not because she spoke a lot, but because she spoke with purpose. Active listening is also helpful in situations where you don't fully understand. If someone says something and you're unsure, you can confirm by repeating it. For example, "So you mean we should wait until next week?" Or, "Do you mean the data from last quarter?" These questions show engagement and prevent confusion, and they make the conversation more efficient. When you rephrase what someone said, even in simple language, you're showing that you've absorbed the message. That's a skill leaders use all the time. It builds trust. People feel heard and respected. Sometimes I meet students who say, "I don't feel smart enough to speak." But I remind them, listening is speaking. When you show that you're listening, people automatically see you as smarter, more present, and more thoughtful. And the beautiful part? You don't need to use advanced grammar or long sentences to do it. You just need to listen closely and respond clearly. Phrases like, "I see your point," "That's interesting," "Let me make sure I understood you," or "What you're saying is," are powerful tools. They can be used in work meetings, casual conversations, or even phone calls. They show that you're not just focused on what you're going to say next. You're focused on building the conversation together. This is one of those skills that grows with awareness. Once you start practicing active listening, you begin to notice the way people respond to you. You'll see more eye contact, more appreciation, more invitations to speak. And you'll feel more confident knowing that you don't have to talk a lot to make a strong impression. Sometimes saying less, with intention, says more. I want to tell you a story that shows how powerful active listening can be, even for someone who thought they weren't the talkative type. Tomás is originally from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and a few years ago he moved to Madrid to work in IT support for a large international company. His job was mostly behind the scenes, troubleshooting systems, answering help desk tickets, solving technical issues. But eventually, his role started to require more direct communication. He needed to explain problems to clients, speak with colleagues across departments, and participate in meetings more often. At first, Tomás felt at a disadvantage. He told me, "I'm not a natural speaker. I don't have strong opinions. I prefer to just do my job." And he assumed that meant he would never be a great communicator in English. He didn't see himself as someone who could lead a discussion or speak confidently in front of a group. English wasn't his native language, and he didn't feel quick enough with his words. So he spoke less and listened more. But instead of seeing this as a strength, he thought it was a weakness. That mindset began to shift during one of our sessions. I asked Tomás how he usually responded during meetings when someone shared an idea. He said, "I just nod or say okay. I don't know what else to say." I introduced him to a few simple, active listening phrases that could help him participate without needing to give long opinions. We practiced lines like, "So what you're saying is," or "It sounds like you're suggesting," or even, "Let me see if I understand you right." At first, Tomás wasn't convinced. He said, "Isn't that too simple? Won't people think I'm just repeating them?" But we talked about the real purpose of those phrases. They aren't about repeating. They're about showing attention and building connection. When you reflect someone's words back to them, you're making them feel heard. You're confirming understanding. And that's one of the most powerful things you can do in a conversation. So Tomás started experimenting. The next time a colleague explained a technical issue, instead of just saying, "Okay," he said, "So what you're saying is the system crashed after the update." His colleague responded with a nod and a smile. "Exactly." Then they continued the conversation more easily. Tomás told me later, "It felt more like a team, like we were solving the problem together." That moment gave him confidence. He realized he didn't have to say something new or original to add value. Sometimes, reflecting someone's idea clearly was all it took to improve the conversation. He continued using this technique and started noticing something interesting. People came to him more often, not just with problems, but with questions and ideas. They trusted him, not because he talked a lot, but because they felt he really listened. As weeks passed, Tomás became more comfortable in meetings. He started using other active listening tools too. For example, if someone proposed a solution he didn't fully understand, instead of pretending, he'd say, "Just to clarify, do you mean we'll run the test before Friday?" That small question showed attention and helped prevent confusion. And when someone shared a successful result, he would say, "That's a great result. It makes sense now that I think about what you said earlier." Simple phrases, but always thoughtful, always connected to what was said before. Eventually, his manager noticed. During a team meeting, she said, "I really appreciate how Tomás always brings clarity to our conversations. He helps us make sure everyone is on the same page." That recognition was huge for him. He never expected to be praised for communication. But by becoming a better listener, he had become one of the strongest communicators on the team. What's important here is that Tomás didn't change who he was. He didn't suddenly become outgoing or start dominating meetings. He stayed true to his quiet nature, but he learned to listen actively, and that changed everything. People started to see him not as someone quiet or distant, but as someone calm, smart, and reliable. There's one story he shared with me that really stayed with me. It was during a cross-department meeting where different teams were discussing a rollout plan. The conversation got a bit messy, with several people speaking over each other, different ideas flying around. Then one person turned to Tomás and asked, "What do you think?" Tomás paused, then said, "I think what you're all saying is, we agree on the deadline, but we're still not clear about the steps leading up to it." The room went silent for a second. Then someone said, "Yes, that's exactly it." And they all started organizing the steps more clearly. Tomás didn't come up with a new idea. He just listened, organized what he heard, and said it out loud. That moment helped bring clarity to the group and showed just how valuable active listening can be. Tomás reminded me of something I often say to my students. Great communicators aren't the ones who say the most. They're the ones who help others feel seen and understood. And you don't need perfect English to do that. You just need attention, presence, and the willingness to engage with what others are saying. Now, whenever I hear someone say, "I'm too quiet to be good at English," I think of Tomas. I remember how he turned listening into a strength, how he stopped worrying about having the right words and started focusing on the person in front of him. That's what made the difference. And that's something anyone can learn to do. One of the most common questions I hear from English learners is this: how can I sound smarter when I speak? And I understand the pressure. In a professional setting, during an interview, or even in a casual conversation, we often want to impress. And many people think that to sound intelligent, you need to use big words, academic words, long words, complex words that maybe you found in a textbook or online article. But here's the truth. Sounding smart isn't about using fancy vocabulary. It's about choosing the right word, the one that fits naturally, the one that's clear and direct. In fact, using complicated vocabulary at the wrong moment often has the opposite effect. It can make your message confusing, awkward, or even artificial. When we try too hard to sound impressive, we sometimes lose the power of connection. The person listening to us might get lost in our sentence or feel that we're not being sincere, and that's not what smart communication is about. I want to show you how everyday vocabulary, when used correctly, can actually sound more intelligent than complex phrases that feel forced or rehearsed. I've seen this time and time again in coaching sessions, meetings, and presentations. The people who speak clearly, using words that everyone understands, are the ones who are most respected. Let me tell you about something that happened with one of my clients, Noor, a marketing analyst from Dubai who now lives in Manchester. Noor is fluent in English, and she loves to read business books and articles. She wanted to sound more professional in meetings, so she started using very formal phrases. Instead of saying, "I think this idea might work," she'd say, "This proposal demonstrates promising potential for execution." Or instead of, "Let's talk more about it," she'd say, "Let us engage in further discourse." Technically, those phrases aren't wrong, but in a casual team meeting, they felt out of place. People were polite, but they seemed confused, even a little distant. Noor came to me frustrated. She asked, "Why does it feel like I'm doing everything right, but no one connects with what I say?" And I told her something simple that changed her approach. The best communicators don't try to sound smart. They try to be understood. We began practicing ways to say the same things, but using vocabulary that was more natural, more conversational. We focused on words that people actually use in real-life situations, not words that sound like they belong in a legal document or a university thesis. And immediately things improved. Here's an example. Instead of utilize, we practiced just saying use. Instead of commence, we said start. Instead of contemplate, we said think about. These aren't baby words. They're powerful because they're clear. And when you speak clearly, people trust you more. They don't have to guess what you mean. They follow you. They listen. The truth is, every language has two layers, the technical layer and the natural one. As a learner, it's easy to fall into the trap of collecting technical words because they often appear in exams or formal documents. But in real conversation, especially in English, clarity is what builds respect. One exercise I love doing with students is rewriting formal phrases into everyday English. For example, take the sentence, "In light of recent developments, it has become imperative to revisit our strategic framework." Now, let's make that clearer. Because of what's happened, we need to look at our plan again. The second version is shorter, simpler, and far more natural. And yet, it still communicates the same idea. Another thing to remember is that people won't think you're smarter just because you use complicated vocabulary. In fact, research shows that speakers who use clear language are often rated as more intelligent and competent than those who use long, difficult words. Why? Because they make ideas easy to understand. They remove the distance between speaker and listener. I had another student, Jonas from Stockholm, who was giving a presentation in front of his company's leadership team in Dublin. He had written a script using terms like ascertain, endeavor, and subsequently. It sounded very polished, but not very real. We rewrote the whole presentation together, using everyday English. So instead of saying, "We must endeavor to ascertain client satisfaction," he simply said, "We need to find out if our clients are happy." The feedback after his presentation was amazing. His manager told him, "You made complex ideas sound easy. That's a real skill." I want you to understand that sounding smart doesn't mean showing off your vocabulary. It means making others feel smart because they understand you. That's the kind of speaker people remember. That's the kind of communicator people want to work with. Now, I'm not saying that advanced words are bad. Of course not. They have their place. If you're writing a research paper or giving a formal speech at a conference, more academic language might be appropriate. But for most daily interactions, in meetings, emails, interviews, and casual conversations, simple, accurate language is your best friend. A useful habit is to always ask yourself, is there a simpler way to say this? And if the simpler version is just as clear, or even clearer, use it. It will help you feel more confident, and it will help others stay engaged with your message. This is especially important if English is your second or third language. You don't need to compete with native speakers by using impressive words. You need to focus on expressing your ideas in a way that feels real and honest. That's what people respect. I encourage my students to build a vocabulary that works for real life, not for tests, not for showing off. Learn the words people actually say when they talk about their day, their work, their plans. Practice those words in context. Use them with confidence. Because when your vocabulary matches the way people actually speak, your conversations become more fluid, more meaningful, and more successful. You already have great ideas. What you need is the confidence to express them clearly, and that starts with trusting simple words. They may not be fancy, but they are strong. They carry meaning. They help you connect. And in the end, connection is what makes communication truly intelligent. Let me tell you about Amina, a determined and passionate English learner from Casablanca. When I first spoke with her, she had been studying English for several years and had built what she called a personal dictionary of advanced words. She was proud of her collection. Long words, academic terms, and formal phrases she picked up from books, podcasts, and articles. Words like meticulous, substantiate, predominant, and ameliorate filled the pages of her notebook. She believed these were the words that would help her stand out, sound smart, and prove her fluency. But there was a problem. Despite all the vocabulary she memorized, she didn't feel confident speaking. In fact, every time she had to join a real conversation, she felt blocked. She would sit across from someone and forget everything she had learned. The words that looked so good in her notes never seemed to come out naturally. And worse, she started avoiding conversations altogether because she felt like she wasn't ready enough. She kept telling herself, just a few more weeks of studying and I'll finally sound fluent. Everything changed during a short trip to Amsterdam. Amina was visiting a friend who worked in a bookstore cafe in the city. One afternoon, they sat down with two other friends, both native English speakers, for coffee and conversation. At first, Amina was quiet. She felt that familiar pressure building. She wanted to use the right words, the impressive ones. She wanted to sound prepared. But as the conversation flowed around her, jokes, memories, thoughts about travel, food, and work, she realized something unexpected. None of them were using big words. They were speaking in simple, natural English. Words like fun, tough, cool, annoying, great, weird, nice, boring. She listened carefully and noticed that the smartest person at the table wasn't the one using advanced words. It was the one who could tell a story clearly, ask a good question, or respond with curiosity. And in that moment, something clicked for her. She told me later, I was sitting there, thinking about all the words I had memorized, but they weren't helping me. They were actually getting in the way. That afternoon, she made a decision. She stopped trying to be perfect. She stopped reaching for the highest level word. Instead, she started saying the first thing that felt natural, even if it was simple. When one of the friends asked her how she liked the Netherlands so far, she didn't try to say, I find it aesthetically captivating and culturally enriching. She just said, it's beautiful. The streets are so calm and people are kind. And for the first time, the conversation flowed. The others responded. She asked them questions. She told them about her city, about Casablanca, about her favorite food, about her trip. The words came slowly at first, but they came. And she felt something new, relaxed. That cafe conversation lasted almost an hour, and it was the first time she felt like she was actually speaking English, not just preparing to speak it. She wasn't translating in her head. She wasn't searching for complicated phrases. She was just talking. Later, she laughed and said, I felt like I was finally using the English I already knew, not the English I thought I needed to learn. After that experience, she made a bold decision. She put away her vocabulary notebook for a while. She stopped adding new words she didn't understand deeply. Instead, she focused on using the words she already knew, words she could pronounce, words she could remember under pressure, words that helped her express real ideas. She started practicing small talk with people around her, at the train station, at the market, at her co-working space. Nothing formal, nothing rehearsed, just real conversations. And because she wasn't trying to impress anyone, she ended up impressing people without meaning to. One of her co-workers told her, "I really like talking with you. You make things easy to understand." That compliment meant more to her than a grammar test score or a new word learned. Amina also began to notice something powerful. When she used simple language, she felt more in control. She could focus on the other person, listen better, ask better questions. Her confidence grew. And eventually, she started giving short presentations at work, in English, without a script. She spoke slowly, clearly, using vocabulary that matched her thoughts, not her textbook. One day she told me, "I realized I was trying to speak like someone else, someone I thought I needed to be. But once I started using my real voice, things became easier." That shift, from memorizing to using, from perfection to communication, is what made her truly fluent. She didn't stop learning vocabulary altogether. Of course not. But now, when she learns a new word, she makes sure she understands how to use it in a real sentence. She practices saying it out loud. She asks herself, "Would I actually use this word in a conversation?" And if the answer is no, she doesn't waste energy on it. I think Amina's story is a perfect example of what happens when we move away from performance and toward connection. When we stop thinking of English as something we have to master before using, and start thinking of it as a tool for building relationships, sharing ideas, asking questions, and understanding others. Amina didn't become fluent by memorizing more. She became fluent by letting go of the pressure to sound impressive and focusing instead on being present, on being honest, on being real. And that shift is something every learner can make, no matter their level. One of the most powerful ways to sound smart in English is not by talking more, but by asking better questions. So many learners focus only on what to say, how to respond, how to give an opinion. But what if I told you that the smartest people in the room aren't always the ones with the answers? They're often the ones who ask the best questions. Asking great questions shows curiosity, thoughtfulness, and a true desire to connect. And that's what makes conversations memorable. Let's think about how most small talk goes. Someone says, "How are you?" And you say, "Good, thanks." Then maybe you ask back, "How about you?" But that doesn't lead anywhere. It's polite, but it stops there. Now imagine you said, "How's your week been going so far?" Or, "What's something fun you've done lately?" Suddenly you've opened a door. You're not just being polite, you're inviting a real conversation. Open questions are the secret. Instead of yes or no questions like, "Do you like your job?" Try, "What do you like most about your job?" It's a small change, but it creates a much bigger opportunity for the other person to share something meaningful. It gives the conversation space to grow. And when you ask thoughtful questions, people feel that you care, that you're paying attention, that you're someone who sees beyond the surface. When I work with students who feel nervous about speaking, one of the first things I teach them is how to lead with curiosity. Even if you don't feel ready to give long answers or detailed opinions, you can still be a great conversationalist just by asking the right questions. And it doesn't take advanced grammar or complicated vocabulary. It takes presence. It takes interest. Let me give you a few examples of questions that work in almost any situation. You can ask, "What brought you here?" instead of, "Are you from here?" You can say, "How did you get into that line of work?" instead of, "Do you like your job?" Or, "What do you enjoy most about your city?" instead of, "Is your city nice?" These are small shifts, but they show that you're really listening, and they make you sound more engaged and more thoughtful. A great follow-up question also goes a long way. If someone says, "I'm studying architecture," instead of just saying, "That's cool," try, "What kind of buildings do you like designing?" Or, "Why did you choose that field?" That shows that you're not just reacting, you're exploring, you're building something together. And that's what smart conversation is all about. I remember a student named Lena from Munich who told me she never knew what to say in group settings. She'd wait for her turn to speak, but then freeze. We worked on asking follow-up questions, and everything changed. She told me about a team lunch where someone mentioned they'd recently started running. Instead of staying silent, she said, "Oh, what motivated you to start running?" That one question led to a whole discussion. Later, someone told her, "You always ask the most interesting questions." And all she did was listen and respond with curiosity. Another great tool is using curious expressions to keep the flow going. Phrases like, "That's interesting. Can you tell me more?" Or, "Really? How did that happen?" Or, "What was that like for you?" Keep people engaged. They also give you time to think while showing that you're present. You don't have to plan your next sentence in advance. You just follow the other person's energy. There's a kind of confidence that grows when you realize you don't need all the answers. You just need to care. And when you lead with a question, you take the pressure off yourself. You're not performing. You're exploring. And that makes speaking English feel less like a test and more like a shared experience. Of course, the best questions come from genuine interest. You don't have to force it. Just be curious. People love to talk about their stories, their hobbies, their cities, their routines. And the moment you show interest, you become someone they enjoy talking to, someone they remember. One of the exercises I often give my students is to write down 5 open-ended questions they can use in everyday conversations. These don't have to be deep or complicated. Something like, "What do you usually do after work?" Or, "What kind of music helps you relax?" Or, "How do you like to spend your weekends?" Questions like these keep things flowing, and they help you practice listening and responding in real time. Sometimes students ask me, "But what if I ask a question and the person doesn't answer much?" That's okay. Not every question leads to a long conversation, but the fact that you asked with intention still shows who you are. And often, even a short answer gives you something to build on. If someone says, "I like photography," you can ask, "What kind of photos do you take?" Or, "How did you get started?" Each answer is a chance to go a little deeper. I've also seen that people who ask good questions are seen as more confident, even if they don't speak a lot. That's because asking a question takes initiative. It means you're not waiting for someone else to control the conversation. You're taking part. You're guiding the flow. And when you do that, you're not just practicing English. You're becoming the kind of person people want to talk to. This is something anyone can learn, no matter your level of English. Whether you're a beginner or advanced, asking good questions is a skill that builds your confidence and creates connection. It shifts the focus away from saying something perfect and towards simply being curious. And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. So next time you're unsure what to say, try asking a question. Let curiosity lead the way. It's one of the smartest moves you can make in any conversation. When Elias first arrived in Dublin, everything felt fast. The people, the buses, the conversations, they all moved at a speed that left him feeling a little behind. He had come from Athens, where his world had been familiar and predictable. But now, in a new city, even ordering coffee made him feel like a visitor in someone else's world. Elias spoke English well. He'd studied it since school. He had passed exams and written essays. But something was missing, the ability to connect. And in group conversations, that gap felt even wider. He once told me that being around native speakers made him feel invisible. "They talk to each other so naturally," he said, "and I don't know how to get in." It wasn't that he had nothing to say. He just didn't know when to say it. Everyone seemed to be laughing at inside jokes, finishing each other's sentences, using idioms he'd never heard before. He felt like an outsider looking in. But what Elias didn't know yet was that his strength wasn't in having all the right words. It was in his natural curiosity. He had always been the kind of person who paid attention, who noticed small things, who liked to understand people's stories. And that part of his personality was about to help him turn everything around. It started during a work lunch. He was sitting at the edge of the table, listening to his colleagues talk about a weekend hiking trip. Normally, he would have stayed quiet, nodded along, smiled. But that day, he did something different. He leaned forward slightly and asked one of them, "What was that hike like for you?" The room went quiet for a moment, not in a bad way, but in a way that meant people noticed. And then the person smiled and said, "Actually, it was harder than I expected, but the view at the top was amazing." Elias didn't try to follow up with a big story of his own. Instead, he asked, "How did you get into hiking?" Another colleague joined in to answer. And just like that, the conversation shifted. It wasn't a fast back and forth of jokes and phrases he didn't understand anymore. It was something real, something human, something he could be part of. He came to our next session and told me, "I think I asked the right question." And I smiled because that's exactly what he had done. That simple question created space for others to reflect, to share, to include him in a way that felt natural. From that day on, Elias started experimenting. At work, at social events, even at the gym, he used his curiosity to invite people in. If someone mentioned a book, he asked, "What did you like about it?" If someone said they were visiting family, he asked, "Where's home for you?" These weren't complicated questions. They weren't long or rehearsed. They were just real. And people responded. He began to notice that people opened up more when he asked, "How did that feel?" Or, "What surprised you about that?" These weren't just surface-level questions. They made people stop and think. They invited reflection. And they showed that Elias wasn't just trying to fill silence, he was genuinely interested. One day, his coworker Emma pulled him aside after a team meeting and said, "I really like how you ask questions. You make people feel comfortable." Elias told me later that it was one of the most meaningful compliments he had ever received in English. Not because it was about grammar or fluency, but because it was about connection. What made Elias successful in these moments wasn't the size of his vocabulary or the speed of his responses. It was the way he listened and the way he asked. He had learned that leading a conversation doesn't always mean speaking the most. Sometimes it means guiding it with questions that matter. And because of that, people started looking to him, not just as a participant, but as someone who could bring others into the conversation too. He became known for remembering small details people shared. Someone might mention they were training for a marathon, and 2 weeks later, Elias would ask, "How's your training going?" That attention, that memory, made people feel seen. And that's what true connection is all about. In time, Elias began to feel comfortable in places that had once made him nervous. Office parties, birthday dinners, casual after-work drinks. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't worried about using difficult words or sounding native. He was just being himself, curious, present, thoughtful. And because of that, he built real friendships. There was one particular moment that stood out for him. At a colleague's farewell dinner, someone new joined the group. This person didn't know many people and looked just as unsure as Elias used to feel. While others were deep in conversation, Elias turned to them and said, "So how do you know Sarah?" That question, simple as it was, opened the door. They started talking. 10 minutes later, they were laughing. And Elias realized he had become the kind of person who could bring others in, the same way he once wished someone would do for him. That's the power of asking good questions. They don't have to be deep or complicated. They just have to be sincere. And when you ask with curiosity, people remember how you made them feel. Elias showed me something I now share with all my students. Your voice doesn't need to be loud to lead. Sometimes the quietest person in the room becomes the most memorable one, not because of what they say, but because of what they help others say. If you've ever felt lost in a group conversation, like you're waiting for the perfect moment to jump in, remember Elias. You don't need to wait. You don't need to prepare a big story. You just need one simple, curious question. And from there, everything can change. When people ask me how to sound smart in English, they usually expect an answer about vocabulary or grammar. But one of the most powerful tools you can develop has nothing to do with the words you choose. It's your tone. It's your voice. It's the way you say what you say. Your tone communicates more than just meaning. It shows confidence, curiosity, calmness, and care. And mastering that can make all the difference. I've worked with learners who speak with perfect grammar but still sound unsure. And I've seen others who speak with mistakes but sound confident, clear, and trustworthy. The difference is in the delivery. It's in their tone, their pauses, their energy. When you speak English with intention, not just repeating words but really delivering a message, people listen. Let's break this down, because it's something everyone can improve. First, let's talk about intonation. That's the natural rise and fall in your voice when you speak. Intonation helps show emotion. It tells the listener whether you're asking a question, making a statement, expressing surprise, or showing interest. Without it, your English can sound flat or robotic. But with it, your voice becomes expressive and engaging. Think of the difference between saying "really" with curiosity and saying really, with doubt. The words are the same, but the feeling changes completely. Or take a sentence like, "That's interesting." If you say it with a flat tone, it might sound like you're bored or even sarcastic. But if you say it with energy rising slightly at the end, it sounds honest and enthusiastic. You don't need to exaggerate your voice. This isn't about acting. It's about being aware. Ask yourself, how do I feel about what I'm saying? And how do I want the other person to feel? Let your tone reflect that. A calm tone can make someone feel safe. An excited tone can create energy. A serious tone can show importance. These are choices you can make in every conversation. Another part of smart speech is the pause. Many learners try to speak without stopping, thinking that pauses make them sound unsure. But in reality, a well-placed pause shows confidence. It gives your listener time to absorb your message. It gives you time to breathe and think. And most importantly, it adds weight to your words. Think of someone giving a speech. The best speakers pause after a powerful sentence. They don't rush. They let the moment land. You can do the same, even in everyday conversations. If someone asks, "What do you think?" you don't have to answer instantly. You can pause, smile, and say, "I think we could try a different approach." That pause shows you're thoughtful. It shows you care about your response. When I work with students who feel nervous about speaking, I tell them, don't be afraid of silence. Use it. Own it. Pausing doesn't mean you don't know what to say. It means you're in control of how you say it. I also want to talk about calmness. This is one of the most underrated communication skills. When you speak calmly, you help others feel calm. You show emotional control. You create a space where people feel comfortable. That's incredibly powerful, especially in professional settings, difficult conversations, or moments of stress. Sometimes we think we need to speak fast to show fluency. But fluency is not speed. It's flow. It's comfort. It's the ability to keep going, to express ideas clearly. A slow, steady, calm tone often sounds more intelligent than a fast, pressured one. There's a student I worked with named Keiko from Tokyo. She had excellent English, but she often felt anxious when speaking to clients. Her voice would speed up and she would lose her breath. We worked on slowing down, breathing between sentences, and lowering her tone just a little. The result was amazing. She didn't change the words she used. She changed how she delivered them. Her clients started telling her, "You explain things so clearly." And that clarity came from calmness. Another student, Kareem from Cairo, told me he used to feel people didn't take him seriously when he spoke. But when we listened to a recording of his voice together, he noticed that his tone was very soft and uncertain, even when he was saying something intelligent. We practiced adding more weight to his voice, speaking with a little more intention, a little more pause. Suddenly, his voice had presence. People started responding differently, not because his English changed, but because his tone did. Tone is also key in showing emotion. And this doesn't mean being dramatic, it means being human. If you're telling a story that made you laugh, let your voice reflect that. If you're talking about a challenge you faced, let your voice soften. Emotion makes your words feel real. It helps people connect. And when people feel connected to you, they see you as someone who is smart, not just intellectually, but emotionally too. A great way to practice all of this is by recording yourself. Read something out loud, like a short paragraph, and record it. Then listen back. How does your voice sound? Is it too flat? Too fast? Are there places where you can pause more? Can you add warmth to your voice? This type of feedback is one of the fastest ways to grow. And if you want to sound more professional in English, pay attention to how people use their voice in real conversations. Listen to how news anchors, podcast hosts, or your favorite YouTubers speak. Notice how their tone shifts, how they pause, how they use emotion. You don't have to copy them exactly, but you can learn from their rhythm, their control, and their presence. Speaking smartly is not just about facts and logic. It's about how you present them. Your voice carries your message. Your tone gives it life. And your calm, clear delivery makes it easier for people to follow you, trust you, and remember what you say. So if you've ever felt like people don't listen when you speak, or that your message gets lost, maybe it's not your words. Maybe it's your delivery. And the good news is, you can shape that. You can practice it. You can develop it into one of your strongest tools. When Priya moved from Mumbai to London for her first job in marketing, she was excited but also overwhelmed. She had studied hard to earn her degree, completed a competitive internship, and felt ready for the professional world. Her English was strong. She had a solid vocabulary, understood fast speech, and could write clear reports. But there was one problem she hadn't expected. She found it incredibly difficult to speak in meetings. In her first few weeks at the office, she stayed mostly silent. During brainstorming sessions, when her manager asked for input, she would nod politely or take notes. When someone asked a question directly, she'd answer briefly and softly, often looking down or rushing through her words. She didn't want to make a mistake. She didn't want to interrupt anyone. And most of all, she didn't want to sound nervous. What Priya didn't realize was that her silence was making people assume she had no ideas. That wasn't true, of course. She had lots of good insights. She just didn't know how to express them with confidence. She told me later, "I felt like I had a voice in my head, but I couldn't bring it into the room." One afternoon, after a meeting where once again she had stayed quiet despite having prepared 2 solid ideas, she went home feeling frustrated. She knew something had to change. That night, instead of opening another grammar app or vocabulary book, she went to YouTube and typed, "How to speak confidently in meetings." What she found surprised her. She discovered TED Talks. Not just the content, but the way the speakers used their voices. The way they paused, how they stood, the energy in their tone. She watched one speaker in particular, a woman who spoke slowly, clearly, and calmly, and thought, "She doesn't sound rushed. She sounds in control." That's when it clicked. The issue wasn't what Priya was saying. It was how she was saying it. From that day, she made it her personal project to improve her presence, not by changing her accent or memorizing long phrases, but by working on tone, pace, and delivery. She started by practicing short sentences out loud every morning before work. Sentences like, "I believe this idea could help us reach more clients," or, "What if we tested this on a small scale first?" Simple phrases, but delivered with a little more space between the words, a little more calm in the tone. She practiced pausing between thoughts. She recorded herself speaking and listened back, noticing where her voice sounded rushed or weak. She even copied the rhythm of the TED speakers she liked. Not the exact words, but the feeling, the confidence, the presence. She also began practicing one small act of courage each day. In one meeting, she asked a follow-up question. In another, she shared an observation about a campaign. She didn't try to take over. She just made sure her voice entered the room. Her first few tries weren't perfect. Her voice trembled a bit. Her face felt warm. But no one laughed. In fact, people listened. One week, she finally shared one of her ideas during a strategy meeting. It was something she had thought about for a while but hadn't dared to say. She started her sentence with, "I've been thinking about a different way to approach this." Then she paused. She let the room quiet. And then she continued, "What if we focused on customer stories instead of just product features?" The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was respectful. People nodded. Her manager said, "That's an interesting angle. Let's explore it." That small moment gave her momentum. She realized that the calm tone she had practiced wasn't just helping her feel more confident. It was helping others understand and appreciate her ideas. She didn't have to speak louder or faster. She didn't have to change who she was. She just had to speak with a little more control. Over time, Priya became known for her thoughtful contributions. Not because she spoke the most, but because when she did speak, people listened. She didn't fill the air with unnecessary words. She spoke when it mattered, and she used the tools she had practiced, intonation, pauses, and presence, to make her message land. There was one meeting where a new colleague dominated the conversation, speaking quickly and loudly, jumping from topic to topic. When it was Priya's turn to present, she didn't try to match his energy. She stayed calm. She said, "Here's what I think we need to focus on," and then outlined her points clearly and slowly. After the meeting, several coworkers told her, "You made everything feel clear again." That feedback meant everything to her. She also began helping others on her team who struggled with similar challenges. She shared the TED Talks she had watched. She encouraged them to record their voice and practice pacing. She even organized a short lunchtime workshop on speaking with clarity, where she explained how slowing down and using tone effectively could help anyone sound more professional. Her manager was impressed and told her it was one of the most useful sessions the team had attended in months. Priya's story is one I come back to often when working with learners who feel invisible in professional settings. because she didn't become someone else. She didn't force herself to be louder or more aggressive. She found her own way of being heard, by controlling her tone, choosing her pace, and speaking with quiet confidence. What changed her professional life wasn't just better English. It was learning how to use her voice, how to pause, how to emphasize, how to speak not just to be understood, but to be remembered. And now, when she walks into a meeting, she doesn't hope to stay invisible. She knows her voice belongs there. If there's one thing I've learned from years of helping people speak English more confidently, it's this. Real change doesn't come from big, dramatic moments. It comes from small, consistent steps. And if you want to sound smarter in English, you don't need a new app, a new textbook, or a long list of vocabulary. You need one thing: daily awareness. And just 5 minutes a day can truly change everything. Let me explain what I mean by daily awareness. Most learners go through conversations without noticing how they speak. They focus so much on what to say next that they miss the opportunity to learn from what just happened. But when you take just 5 minutes at the end of your day to reflect, observe, and practice, you start building something powerful: self-awareness. And self-awareness is the secret tool that fluent speakers use without even realizing it. They pay attention. They adjust. They learn from every moment. You can do that too. You just need a simple habit. Here's what I want you to try. At the end of each day, take 5 minutes to ask yourself 3 questions. The first question is, what conversation today felt good? Think back to any moment in your day, at work, on a call, in a shop, or even online, where you spoke English and felt comfortable. It doesn't have to be perfect. It could be something small, like ordering coffee or asking for help. What words did you use? What helped you feel confident? Just noticing what went well helps you grow faster. We often focus only on our mistakes, but your progress is hidden in your small wins. The second question is, where did I feel stuck? Again, this doesn't mean you failed. It just means there's something to explore. Maybe you were in a meeting and couldn't find the right word. Maybe you were talking with a friend and didn't know how to continue the conversation. Write it down or think it through. What was missing? Was it a word, a phrase, or just time to breathe? Noticing your weak spots gives you a clear direction for improvement, without judgment, just curiosity. And the third question is, what can I try tomorrow? This is where the real power is. You're not just reviewing, you're preparing. You're planting a seed for the next conversation. Maybe you'll try to pause more. Maybe you'll ask one open-ended question. Maybe you'll slow your speech just a little or use a new connector like actually or from my perspective. When you set one small goal for the next day, you're training your brain to improve naturally. Now, let's turn this into a real habit. I suggest choosing a specific time each day to do this, right before bed, during your commute, or after dinner. Keep it short. 5 minutes is enough. You can write your answers in a notebook, type them into your phone, or just say them out loud. The important part is that you do it every day. And here's why this works so well. It connects your learning to your real life. You're not studying isolated grammar rules. You're learning from your own experience, from your voice, from your moments of connection and challenge. That kind of learning is personal, emotional, and long-lasting. Over time, you'll notice patterns. You'll see which words you use often, which phrases make you feel strong, and which moments still bring tension. That awareness will help you choose better strategies. You might decide to focus on tone, or connectors, or asking more questions. The habit guides your learning in a natural, personal way. And if you miss a day, don't worry. The habit isn't about perfection. It's about returning. It's about coming back to yourself, your progress, and your voice. The most important thing is that you keep showing up, that you keep reflecting, that you stay connected to your growth. Let me share an example. I worked with a student named Eleni from Thessaloniki. She worked in hospitality and interacted with guests from all over the world. At first, she felt overwhelmed. Her vocabulary was fine, but she didn't feel smart or in control. I suggested this 5-minute habit to her. At first, she didn't believe it would make a difference. 5 minutes won't change my English, she said. But after 1 week, something shifted. She noticed that she always avoided small talk with guests. She felt awkward asking personal questions. So one day she set a goal. Ask one guest, "What brings you to the city?" That's all. She tried it, and the guest smiled and told her a long story about their trip. The next night, she asked someone, "How was your day?" These tiny moments made her feel more connected and more confident. After a month, she wasn't just speaking more, she was leading conversations. Her team noticed, her manager praised her, and she told me, "It started with those 5 minutes, just thinking about my day and deciding what to try next." That's the power of this habit. This is something you can start today, right now. And you don't need perfect grammar, expensive tools, or advanced lessons. All you need is curiosity and 5 minutes. Ask yourself those 3 questions. What felt good today? Where did I feel stuck? What can I try tomorrow? This simple reflection turns your everyday moments into your classroom. It makes your English learning personal, and over time, it transforms how you speak, how you listen, and how you feel in every conversation. You don't need to wait for confidence. You can build it, one small moment, one new habit, one clear intention at a time. Your voice gets stronger each day you use it with purpose, and the smartest thing you can do is keep showing up.